Tricia Jones Parkin. I'm from Utah. I'm just going to go ahead and disclose I am not the best trainer on customized employment. I have a great amount of passion for it. I was mentored by the greatest people in customized employment. I got to spend lots of time with Kerry Griffin before he retired. And when I remember it was 2005, and I went to learn how to do benefits planning and counseling. And I learned from I learned from Dave Hammis and Diana Beckley, and learned about just the power of self-employment and understanding just the real impact of work. And I said to myself, I went and bought every book and said to myself, if I ever get a chance to spend time with Dave Hammis and Kerry Griffin, I'm gonna do it. And I did. After we wrote our Employment First legislation in 2011. And I convinced our state that we needed to build capacity in our provider system, and that we needed to bring in experts to be able to do that. I was able to spend, 6-7 years just in people's living rooms and really learning how to do the work. And then I wrote some grants and just was able to continue that. And now I'm able to provide the training and do it in a way that really makes sense for our state and build in the mentoring. And so that's what I'm sharing with you here. This is a Padlet. I don't know if anybody's used those before, but the way that I structure the customized employment training in our state is we have what we call tiered training. And so we start with workplace support. So that's just introductory job coaches who are helping people that already have a job maintain those jobs. And then we build into what is the ACRE training, which is at least 40 hours, and that's all of the basic ACRE competencies around supported employment. And then people who have their ACRE certificate are able to come into the customized employment training, which is another 80 hours of training. And that includes the curriculum and then the applied work, which is completing a discovery staging record, completing a visual resume, doing a customized employment planning meeting, and then a job development plan. And so the way that I've structured this content is just by each of the phases of discovery, and I'm going to talk about that. But I wanted to just share these resources where I'm giving like the most tiniest overview. It's so much information. If this is something that you're wanting to learn more about, I have broken down each of the steps and kind of walked through it. And that's how I teach it and provide mentoring to people. So anyway, I just wanted to make sure that you knew that resource, the link to the Padlet, is on my PowerPoint. What do I push again, Patrick? Control something? God, I'm a mess. Okay. Where is PowerPoint? Good grief. I can't. Do what? See how Steve supports me? Ta-da. Okay. You're welcome. Thanks. The best part is I have no shame ever in the amount of support that I need. Right. So I want to just kind of start it out with, this is the definition of evidence-based practice, right? And that is what we base our work on. And evidence-based means that we're using research to provide data, whether a practice is effective or not. And so that's just kind of that's the premise of what we're doing here. And that there are more than 20 states who have now adopted discovery and customized employment. So that is including both the developmental disability services in the waiver, and then also we're seeing it in school systems. A lot of the work that I have done in Utah, in Iowa, I've done some work in Rhode Island. There's certainly several other states where discovery and the principles of discovery are being implemented in the school system and working with transition age youth. And then obviously in the VR agency policies, as the language was included in the WIOA regulation in 2014. So it really said, Voc Rehab, we expect you to offer customized employment services to people. The challenge is, right, is that that doesn't say we can make sure everybody has the capacity. So while we're really committed to it in Utah, we have pockets and areas of our state where nobody is providing the service or it's even available. And that's certainly the case in lots of places. We shared this yesterday at the PAC-RIM conference. This has been around since, what, 2010, I think, this competency model. And this came out of all of the demonstration projects that happened in the early 2000s. So Office of Disability Employment Policy funded a stretch of work over 10 years that really dive, whatever word you want to use, into customized employment across several states with several providers. And what they found was these were the competencies and what it takes to do this work. So not only are these the components of customized employment, so discovery, job search planning, job development, and negotiation, and then, right, the post-employment support, is this wheel of competencies. And what we really wanted to talk about, and I think all of the things that I've heard today, not only at Steve and my discussion this morning, and certainly what you talked about early, and you know, the keynote this afternoon, is this open and positive approach to life. It's really, really hard to do this work if you don't believe that people are capable and that the world is going to be open to what you bring and what this person has to contribute, right? It doesn't mean that we're ignoring barriers or that we're ignoring challenges that exist, but we have to believe that there's a way forward. So again, it's kind of thinking about what, you know, who are in the roles of this work that we're doing, especially around employment and community, and who are the faces that are interfacing with community members or with potential employers. And is that the approach that they have in this work, right? And obviously all these other competencies. One of the first things that I do with people that are taking this course and beginning to do this work is I have them read this competency model article and identify what they feel like they are their greatest strengths or their greatest competencies and why, and then what they feel like they're going to really need to work on in order to do this work of discovery in comparison to more the traditional approach of supported employment. And honestly, you know, there's been some honesty around, it's been interesting to see people answer that question and think about what their strengths are and then what they feel like they need work on. And it's been a nice way for me to be able to tailor or customize, if you will, the kind of support that they need as they're going through this course. I only allow 10 people in my course at a time, so I'm really able to give them the support that they need. And it's been a helpful way to say this person needs a little bit more support around planning and organization. That positive and open approach to life, that's a tough one. If somebody doesn't have it, that's a tough one. I don't know how to teach that. I really don't. I don't know if anybody here does. Maybe that's where we need that culture director position that the wonderful young woman in our session earlier that just lifts everybody up, right? I think Roy could definitely make people have a different approach to life. He certainly impacted me today. Anyway, so if you have a chance, this is also in the Padlet as a resource. If you've never read it, it is a great introduction to customized employment, and then also a really great way to maybe restructure your job descriptions for employment specialists and the qualities that you're looking for, if that's something that you are wanting. So I think this is an important slide to look for. This is something that you can just think about as an organization, and I'm not sure what your roles are, you know, of you that are out there in the audience, but you know, if we look at organizations across the country that are successful in utilizing these best practices and using evidence-based practices, these are some of the similar characteristics that we see. Thoughtful risk-taking, shared values. I keep referencing my presentation yesterday, but and I'm happy to share it if that's something that you would like. We talked a lot about using the principles of discovery, but then also using values to drive the change, or kind of the roots of how you provide support to staff, and what your training looks like to have longevity and sustainability in your organization. So thinking about what the values are, those, zero exclusion, everybody can work, being, respectful, thinking about, culture kinds of issues or differences. Organizations who are successful are regularly looking at themselves, saying, what are we doing? Is anybody else out there doing it better? And can we learn from them? Right? I know that that's something that Karen talks about all the time, is that regular evaluation of their organization and where they're going, the partnerships that Steve talked about, holistic focus on the person. So we're not just thinking about the job, right? We all know that we can get the person the job, right? But if all of the other pieces of their life are not working, they don't have supportive housing, or family is not behind these efforts that you're making, or sabotaging the job, that can happen sometimes, right? If we're not educating them about financial implications, or all of the list of things that can happen if families are anxious or nervous about employment, right? We have to think about all those pieces. Not that an employment specialist has to be responsible, but that we're considering the whole person. Again, that emphasis on continuous improvement, that goes along with that self-examination. And I think this one's really important, but involving staff at every level with those goals and decision-making. How does this impact the people who are implementing this work? I don't know, just recently, right, I work at the university, and in a matter of weeks, there were like 3 new forms that I got to start filling out with no involvement and with no real purpose. And when I asked why, I was kind of looked at like a jerk, and I don't think I'm unique to that situation. And we all have things we don't like to do and that we have to do. But again, trying to just include people in those decisions. Those are some characteristics of successful companies when there was a study done. So again, I wanted to just also point out the connection of customized employment to supported employment, and that it is considered an outcome, right, or a piece of community integrated employment, or competitive integrated employment as it is defined. Whew, that was a mouthful. By the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act, right? There was that moment where we were questioning what CIE, the acronym for the day, what it meant. And we have defined it. And customized employment is considered a competitive integrated employment outcome. Even though we're not looking at a competitive process, the end result is always at or above minimum wage, all of the same definitions that competitive integrated employment is, if that makes sense. In a lot of states, and this is not necessarily how it has to be implemented, but what it is looking like is that somebody who, because the service has kind of been identified as a successful strategy for people with more significant disabilities, it is often within the supported employment track. So somebody who needs ongoing support, somebody who has been categorized, and I know I'm using language that may not align with your Hawaii vocational rehabilitation, I apologize. In Utah, it is considered a most significant disability category. Then that's an appropriate service that somebody might get. There's also a decision-making tool that just came out. I need to put it in the Padlet link, or in the Padlet, so you have access to that. It's a really great guide, not only for VR counselors, but for anybody who is involved in trying to understand, should this person have a customized approach, or should they have a traditional approach? And it helps you make the difference, or make the decision about why and what the differences would be. It's also it's a really great educational tool. Has anybody seen that? It came out in like November 23. Okay, I'll be sure and share that. I already kind of talked about what the definition of competitive integrated employment is. It is either full or part-time. It's within community businesses. It also includes self-employment. So that's a component of customized that we don't talk about a lot, but it is in the language that it can be an outcome, right? It's just not something we pursue as much, especially if somebody needs, a lot of support, but it is a very viable option. We certainly met a couple of people who are entrepreneurs and running, doing their own businesses today, which was really wonderful to see. Again, we're always talking about at least minimum wage and that people have the opportunity for advancement, right? None of this is new, but it applies to customized employment as well. These are the definitions, again, both falling under competitive integrated employment. So supported employment being an evidence-based practice, also meant for people with significant impact of disability. And, VR funds this, it's individual placement and support falls under supported employment funding. And VR can fund it for up to 2 years under the new regulations. That's implemented differently in every state, so don't completely quote me. I don't know how it looks in every state. Our state's different than Maryland, right? It depends on funding and wait lists and all those kinds of things. And then customized employment, also evidence-based, is we have fidelity scales. I'll talk about those. And again, it is meant for people who have a significant impact of disability. We can use these strategies with people who don't have a significant impact of disability, who can maybe self-direct or do some of the process themselves. We did a little bit of that today. It was very messy. It was very fun. I think we got some good starts with some folks. But it does include self-employment, and I certainly saw that could be an outcome for some people today. Again, you guys are going to get copies of this. I know it's a lot of information. But I will tell you, as we introduce or we really create capacity for customized employment, when I talk to people, whether it's educators or a provider or a family, and I say, tell me more, tell me why you want to learn or implement customized employment. And almost always the answer is, well, we really want to get everybody a job, and I support some people that I can't figure it out, or I have not figured out what that might look like for them. I'm working with 10 schools in Iowa right now, and there were 3 teachers that had a similar response to that. I've got this kid, and I have no idea how I'm even going to think about employment for this kid. And right, that's vulnerable. Nobody likes to think I have no idea what to do. I'm a professional. I'm supposed to know. So being open to new strategies and a new way to think about employment for somebody is the first step. And that is absolutely why I looked into customized employment in terms of employment, being an employment first state, was we need to make sure that we have tools and strategies for everyone to try, to really try to figure out, even if it takes a year, 2 years, whatever it is. Sorry about that. So one of the things that I learned from Chris Button, who has been very invested in customized employment and supported employment for years and years. I believe she still is at ODEP, yes. Steve is like in the backyard, so he knows all the things. But I have heard her say many times that customized employment stands on the shoulders of supported employment. And I love that, right? Because it really is just taking a little bit more time, and then we fold into what those supported employment services look like with coaching and systematic instruction and task analysis. All of those things that we do and those best practices absolutely apply, right? As we're doing those long-term supports. So it is not a service or a program. It is an approach. It is tools. It is not group-based. We did do some group-based work today because we wanted to just have a different conversation and get people thinking and learn from each other. So there has been some group discovery that has come out of of some of this work that we've been doing over the last several years. But when you are facilitating discovery for a person with a significant impact of a disability, you are doing one-on-one services, digging deep, really figuring it out. We're not looking at a labor market approach. We're not looking at, who's hiring or what the industry trends are. And we're not looking for the dream job, even though sometimes people, that's what it feels like, right? Or they're doing absolutely what makes sense for them. We're not using that language of, this is my dream job, okay? And the reason why it can be a little bit of a trap, right? Because sometimes we don't always know what the whole dream job entails. And if the job seeker or the family gets, can get stuck on that, it's really hard to kind of bring it back. I've had that happen many, many times and been able to work it through most of the time. I could think of twice that it didn't go well. But it's tricky. You just spend a lot of time, kind of getting through some of those sticky points and it being rough and a couple weeks of ignoring and then coming back again. So just kind of trying to avoid or put that up front that we're not talking about dream job here, okay? And it doesn't mean that we're not looking for a good match. We're just going about some other ways to get there. This is not standard vocational evaluation or testing. We're not doing paper and pencil tests. We're not, clicking boxes or seeing if somebody can lift 50 pounds. We might need to know those things about somebody, but we're not necessarily, that's not part of discovery, right? Somebody might tell you in a conversation that you have that this person can lift, 20 bales of hay or, help sandbagging with a flooding community. That was one of the informational interviews, a conversation I had with a neighbor about this young man, how he just outworked everybody when they were having a flood in their community. And he just wouldn't stop, and he was just so strong, and he just kept filling the sandbags. And it was such a great description, right? And so I wanted to be sure and include those quotes. But that wasn't this so-and-so can lift 40 pounds for 20 hours or whatever the amount of time was. That wasn't a standardized test, but I knew that he was strong. I knew that he could lift things. I knew he could work outside from that conversation. Does that make sense? Okay, I'll stop belaboring. So again, these are things that are not customized, right? That kind of that standardized testing. You might read some of those things in a person's file, but that's not what we're basing this process on. We're creating a more rich virtual resume instead of a paper resume. They might have one that you can put some of that information in terms of past job experiences or volunteer kinds of things. But that's not what we're doing. If we're filling out applications in the development phase or that place where we're negotiating positions, it is a formality only, right? Just that they have a system and they need everybody in that system, but that you have negotiated and created the position without that competitive application process. We're not doing a lot of interview skills training because we're going to find places where it just makes sense, where those natural connections might happen. This isn't, we're not seeking out group employment, or we're not just placing people, right? Again, those are not bad things, but that's not what this is. So just to kind of make some clarifications in case you don't know, right? The labor market approach is that which we're looking at trends in employment and hiring. We're looking at vacancies. We're looking at want ads. You might go to the job center and register and say, I want to look at cooking jobs. These are my goals. Right? There's a lot more rigid requirements that you're looking if you can meet all of the things in a job description. It's oftentimes, right, there's just not a flexible process that we can work with. These are typical jobs, right, that you hear about and that are vacant and actually recruited for. Again, not bad jobs, but not typically meant for people who have more complex disabilities or need a lot more customization, which is why we go through a different approach. There are jobs we know about. There are jobs that that are advertised for. Again, it's common to ask if you're hiring, that sort of a thing. So knowing that doesn't work all the time for a person with the greatest impact of disability, we want to think about what are some alternative strategies. I often hear, well, I'm just not serving people that have a lot of barriers right now. I just don't have the time. I don't have time to do discovery. I don't have time to support people who need a job coach. I need to get in and get out. And I guess that's fine if they want to be honest about that, but that's not really serving. That's not zero exclusion, right? That's not keeping the principles of supported employment and best practices. So making sure that you have those tools and strategies that you can work with everyone, I think is really key. And it certainly strengthens, I think, all of your practices. Just want to share a quick story. This is a young man that I've known since he was, 14 or so. And we met at the dog park. And Josh just, his dog was older and didn't want to play ball as much as my dogs did at the time. And so when I had the chuck it, because I can't throw a ball worth anything, he wanted to come and have a turn. Like he would just come over and just take my chuck it and throw it. And we became friends and connected over our dogs. We didn't call each other when we were going to go to the dog park, but if we saw each other, it was great. And then I got to know his mom. We started talking about what we did for a living. She taught piano. I worked for the Developmental Disability Agency. She asked about the waiting list. Of course, I told her. They got on the waiting list. He turned 16. She wanted to help him get his first job. We talked about it. He started walking my dogs a couple times a week because he knew them. They loved him. So, threw him a couple bucks that way. Then he wanted to work at the grocery store down the street, but he didn't have a job coach. He didn't have any services. So we just kind of showed up and figured out what he needed. Right? This kind of gets to you don't have to always have formal supports to figure things out. Josh has a lot of ways that he compensates for himself. He's very difficult to understand, but he can use his technology to help people understand what he needs, or he's just I can't even describe all the ways in which he just his compensatory strategies are incredible. And he's a leader. He just gets people on board. He just has some really naturally great skills. So, time goes on. He's now 27. This animal and caregiver and advocate interest just kept evolving. So he worked at the grocery store all through school. Then he wanted to go on a mission. He's, for his church, he's LDS, Mormon for the common term. And they wanted him to work in the Bishop's Storehouse, which is basically the Mormon church grocery store that people can access. And he was disappointed. And we had a talk about it. And I was like, well, what do you mean? He says, I've already done that. I've been doing this work. I wanted to do something different. And so we talked about it. And I says, well, what is it that you want to do? And he says, I want to learn how to use some tools. And so we looked at all the opportunities that the church had for this service mission. And he learned how to build furniture for a year and a half. And then once that mission was over, he wanted to kind of go back to working with animals. So we found this, and now he's connected to services. He's gone to VR. He still is on the waiting list. We have like a 10-year waiting list in Utah, at least minimum. He'll probably be on there for 20. But anyway, we kind of just started cataloging all these different things. And because he now knew how to build stuff, he could do some repairs. We found this rescue farm that also does like tours, and it's connected to this historical farm that's not very far from where we live. So now he does animal education. So he's hugging an emu, and then he does these walks with the pony. It gets really busy on the weekends. There are times of year that it's not great. in terms of the hours. It's not enough for him. So he also works as, he serves lunch at the elementary school. So he has a couple different jobs, but this love for animals and this advocacy and animal educator is something that he really loves. I was nervous about the animal educator piece because of his language. I was worried that people wouldn't be patient. So this was me not having enough belief or what's the word, presuming competence. I was guilty of that. I was worried that people wouldn't like give him the space or the respect he needed, and they absolutely did. He talks about what the animals need, what their injury was, why they're there. He's amazing. And people listen to him, and the speech thing is not an issue. I was worried about it, but he wasn't, right? So anyway, long story short, we just kind of built on all of these interests and these connections that we had and we shared. So the point is that we have to kind of match these interests and then these skills. Some of them were emerging. He had no idea how to use those tools. And we didn't know that him using that tools would become beneficial as he worked for this farm, right? And repairing fences or doing some of the other things that he hadn't done before. And that we could then use that to be able to contribute to what some of those unmet needs were of the business. So when we do customize employment, we are focusing on what the person's interests are and then what skills and tasks are related to those interests. Interests are not enough by themselves, right? You can't just say, I love pizza. That can't be a theme. It can't be a job. You have to have something connected to pizza that will help you connect to work, right? Whether it's making pizza, maybe it's art around pizza, maybe it's, right? So do we expand it to food? I don't know, but right, you can't just say, I love video games, but then not have any skills or tasks coming up connected to that. There can be emerging ones. There can be one task. Somebody can make toast. Somebody can pull laundry out of the dryer. That is a task, right? That might be associated with cleanliness. So don't hear me say that somebody has to be an expert at something to call it a theme or, you know, that you move forward with customized employment, but that interest is not enough. So think about that, right? So you can't just ask somebody what they want to do or what they're interested in. You can start there, but then we have to build, right? Vocational themes, this is kind of a tricky concept. Vocational themes help us think bigger. Think of themes as like a big umbrella that holds all of the job descriptions in a certain vocational area. So for lack of creativity on my part right now, somebody who really enjoys organizing or is very cleanly, very, just has things orderly. Cleanliness might be that broader theme for them. Or maybe they only want to keep their bedroom clean and they don't care about anywhere else, right? Then it may not be. Or somebody's really into, video games and they do have some tasks and skills around it. The broader theme might be entertainment, right? It could be that there's other things that they're interested in. Where else or what kind of other things within entertainment could we explore, right? Are you getting an idea of what I mean when not limiting it to just the job description or a certain element within there? Okay. This is customized employment on like super speed. The other piece that really makes up part of what the vocational theme is the ideal conditions of employment. So we did some work with people today where we looked at all these different kinds of things like what time of day do you prefer to work? Do you want to work inside or outside? What kind of health considerations do you need to think about? Do you like working by yourself? Do you like working with a group of people? Do you need a combination of both? Do you need a faster paced environment or do you need things like mellow or slow? All of those things also go in to what the vocational theme might be. So there's a lot that goes into that vocational theme. And that's often where people get stuck and where they need mentoring. And so having another person in the organization or a trainer or somebody have some expertise to problem solve that is very, very helpful. And we have some resources to do that and help you kind of tease out what somebody's theme might be. Some are very, very obvious, right? And you have to kind of slow down and not jump to the job. When somebody is just screaming at you, computer, technology, whatever it is. But I encourage you to, just kind of slow that down a little bit. The other piece that I want to think about is that customized employment is really, it's an economic development model, because you're not just looking at what is existing already in the community. You're creating something. You're creating something for the person. You're creating an opportunity within a business. You might be creating something because there's an unmet need that the business has, or a community is missing something. And so this person might be able to bring that with resources from VR or whatever it might be that comes together and makes sense. Roy has a beautiful plan for transportation in, I want to say it's Kona. Forgive me for not knowing all of the right island terms. Right, the number of vans that he needs and what it's going to do and how it's going to operate and the costs. There probably needs to be some, some numbers ran, but he's very passionate about it. From an advocacy standpoint, from a transportation standpoint, there's a whole bunch of things feeding into that. And to me, that is an economic development issue. That is a community issue. It is not just a disability issue. Right? There are other people besides Roy that can't get where they need to go. And he's thinking about that all the time. He has pages of what he's thinking about. So I'm excited to see how we help him. These are some of the common economic development goals. If you look on any community website, right? And I don't expect you to make sense of that graphic up there. That's terrifying. But when you get the copy of it and you can't wait to dig deeper, you can make sense of it. So, but right, these are the things that are connected to economic development. So looking at unmet needs of a community and then thinking about what this person's contributions are, that helps you also expand what employment can look like and what opportunities exist. It really does take somebody being curious and having an open mind and giving them the time to do that work. Steve talked about this, if you were in his previous session, how we are talking about dual customers, right? Not only are we thinking about the job seeker, but we're also thinking about the business community. And he spent so much time talking about how we have to engage and think about what the businesses need and employ, and what that partnership looks like. And understanding what business needs are. That is not something that people can learn overnight, right? Steve, how many years did you spend at 100 hours a week or whatever, really just immersing yourself in business, and now you're mentoring and teaching others? So again, having those structures and resources within your organization and building that together. Nobody can do this tomorrow, right? So one of the pieces that I very much learned from Carrie is looking at small business versus larger corporations. I think that there has been some change in this area with a lot of the initiatives with diversity and just larger disability initiatives. I think there is a little bit more flexibility in larger corporations. You see Nike and Microsoft and lots of places that have strong inclusion efforts, right? I think as a whole, you can always talk to a decision maker in a small business, right? They are the ones controlling those hiring decisions typically. They may not even have job descriptions for people or an HR department, right? They are HR. And so they might have the ability to be more flexible and creative. And oftentimes they are active members, right, in their community. Active on the chamber, whatever it might be. that's certainly the way that I learned, is thinking about small business. And it's certainly what I encourage people to do when they're learning about their business community, is to look for those small businesses, because we know where the big stores are, right? We know where the Targets and the Home Depots and some of those bigger chains are. And as a whole, they're harder to get into, but it's not impossible. So don't hear me say that you can't customize a job with a large corporation, because you can. And I have been part of some of those initiatives. But I've also seen some really beautiful opportunities created with small business. Steve talked about social capital and relationships. We spent the whole morning helping people kind of mine what their relationships look like, and what their networks look like. And it's the other piece that we talked about was that notion of reciprocity. And are we really supporting people to be reciprocal? And not just, that they are receivers of service and always having somebody support them, but how are they giving back? How are they being, contributors, not only in the workplace, but with coworkers or in their neighborhood, whatever that might look like? What are their social roles in their communities? And there are more opportunities that we can support people with to do that. I love this quote by Robert Putnam. The positive effects of social capital, people in relationships can reach goals that would have been far beyond the grasp of individuals in isolation. So that's his book, Better Together. That's an oldie but a goodie. Natural supports. Steve spoke to this. Certainly, right, there are so many people that don't have all the services and supports they need. So looking and identifying where are those unpaid or those natural relationships. It doesn't always have to be family. It can be friends, it can be neighbors, it can be, in somebody's church or spiritual community. Coworkers, right, can become really strong natural supports. Fellow students. I've been doing a lot of work with transition age youth that are in, either post-secondary programs or whatever. And, there's some really great bonds that are formed there, and then they don't continue because they don't have that facilitation or the support. The parents don't know each other or whatever. And, that can be a real loss for people in terms of that natural support. So, just making sure some of those things continue. This quote here this is out of the Developmental Disability Services Act. So it's an expectation that personal associations and relationships that enhance the quality and security of life for people. So it's supposed to be in the DD Act that people have access and support to have those natural relationships. And it is a struggle. When because we're mentoring and supporting job seekers through the process, so many times the only people in a person's life are the paid staff or the paid support, and we have to work really, really hard to find some community members or help them connect based on interest versus just disability specific kinds of groups. And that's across the board, right? It's not just a state specific thing. So take a minute. I know we're kind of spread out, but I would love it if you would just have a conversation with the person next to you and just talk about what you know about goats. Just randomly talk about goats. What do you know in relation to goats? Do you know anybody that has goats, milks goats, sells goats, is interested in goats, has a pet goat, knows somebody who knows goats? Anything, just go. 30 seconds, talk goat. If you need to move, that's fine too. I guess I should have researched if goats are allowed on this island or something. I'm encouraged by the non-silence. Okay, for the sake of time, let's cut off the goat conversation. Somebody just start shouting out. What did you learn? Who knows something about goats? Go. What? Okay, perfect. I would have not thought about what the Japanese word for goat is. Anybody else? Go. Okay. So they'll just be on the highway. Okay. Anybody have goats or know somebody that has goats? Okay. Anybody interested in? Go ahead. Oh, you want the fainting goats. Okay. All right. So there is more goat interest than it's not just that silly to talk about is what you're telling me. You're glad that I brought it up. Perfect. Good. Glad I could help you out. Anybody else so excited to talk about goats? Yeah.
Well, I'm not excited to talk about goats at all. But I know a friend who goes to goat yoga. Yeah, that's all I know. That's all I know.
I can't get behind that. I don't get it.
It's all.
Okay. They're just all over. Could you talk more about goats than you thought you could? Okay, that's the whole point, right? That there's always somebody who wants to learn something and somebody who knows something about that topic, whether it's goats or bees or transportation. It happens all the time, right? It's why we have communities of practice. It's why we have the business advisory councils. There's always connections made. So goats was my example. Thank you for at least humoring me. And, do that in staff meetings or whatever. Hey, I've got this, I'm working with this person and they have this interest in whatever. And then just see what people come up with. I don't expect anybody to know geography of Utah, but it is a huge state with clumps of people along the Wasatch Front, along the mountain range, and then very rural. And I had somebody that was in the training that was down in St. George, which was 5 or 6 hours from Salt Lake City. Another person that was in the city. The employment specialist is working with a job seeker, very interested in theater, entertainment, costumes. And she was like, I just moved here. I don't know anything. I don't know anyone. The employment specialist in St. George had just moved from Salt Lake City, was very involved in the theater community, gave her all of his connections. They just happened to be in the same class together. So gave her all of these connections, and it resulted in this really great discovery activity and a work experience for this young man. He was still in school, all because she had that conversation. And I mean, I just opened the Zoom room, right? That's all that happened. So those are the kind of things that we want to try to keep happening and encourage people to ask those questions. So getting into the process a little bit more, these are the phases of customized employment. So we start with discovery. Really good, rich discovery is what leads to really good, rich job development. If you really don't uncover who this person is, where they're at their best, know what their ideal conditions of employment are, it's going to be really tough to do good job development and have it be meaningful. So that discovering personal genius phase, discovery is really, really important. And oftentimes when people get stuck in the cultivating the employment phase, I will go back to that staging record or that discovery process and find some holes and say you probably needed to do a few more discovery activities, or you might have needed to do another informational interview with a business here and learn a little bit more. So, and it's not all the time, but they have to connect, right? The work that you do in discovery needs to connect to what you do in job development. And then we move into those employment, the employment support. So thinking about, what kind of supports this person is going to need, ongoing. And this is where it really gets into those principles of supported employment, where you're trying to fade as soon as you get in, you're using good instruction, you're thinking about the technology that this person might need, you're looking for opportunities, you're negotiating and creating, the position or the tasks or the hours. All of those things are kind of tailored in. And then you're thinking about the long-term supports and what that person might need. Again, very abbreviated version. There's a lot more information that you can get into from the resources on the Padlet. But really, our goal with discovery is to really get to know this person. And we do that through the discovery activities in their familiar space, and then go out to spaces that they're not as familiar in, trying new tasks. We learn from people who know them really well. And it's meant to be optimistic. You cannot fail discovery. If somebody gives you a discovery staging record and then recommends that they don't pursue employment, they did it wrong. There's no other description or summary for that. You cannot fail discovery. Period, end of story. Somebody might not want to finish it. Somebody might have health issues that makes it difficult to really get through it, and maybe you pause, but you cannot fail discovery. So if you walk away with anything today, you cannot fail discovery, right? Okay. All right, I can't read, so I have to put this on. I do need my reading glasses. I do need that. So discovery should be the foundation of customized employment. And that can look different. I'm tracking the hours that people are spending in the phases as they're learning. It is taking people about 40 hours, some a little bit more based on the complexity of the person's disability, some a little bit less, but it is averaging between 35 and 40 hours to complete the discovery process. And that is from the beginning to the customized employment planning meeting. That's about what it's taken. Some states it's not that robust, or it's done more in phases. But that's about what I'm tracking with the 45 people that I've trained over the last 3 years and provided mentoring to. But our goal is that we're looking for, lasting, satisfying employment. It doesn't mean that this is this person's forever job. I have to tell you, I thought that if I did discovery with someone and we created this customized position, that they would do it forever. Why did I think that? I don't know why I thought that. It was really silly of me. None of us nobody expects anybody to stay in a job forever, but I had this idea that because we were investing all this time, that it was going to be the, Disneyland of jobs. And no, it's still a really good match, but it doesn't mean that people have to do it forever, right? I don't know if you ever went through that, Steve, but I sure did.
Still going through.
We've talked about this, how we're not using, the fixed kind of test, but I also want you to think about, where are you at your best? Is it when you're being tested, or is it when you are kind of exploring familiar environments, or you get kind of space and time to figure that out? Think about whether you were in school. And I know that we all had to kind of go through some of those things, but I certainly wasn't at my best, right? With those kinds of environments. So that's really what this opportunity is meant to be. Some other rules for discovery activities or other kinds of elements related to going through the process. It's a bad idea if it increases stigma, if it reinforces the stereotype, and it's not individualized. So if somebody tells me, we're just gonna go to the mall and walk around, not a discovery activity. Nope, what are you gonna learn by walking around at the mall? You might learn some things that they like to buy, but that's not task-based, right? You wanna learn action, you wanna learn what somebody likes to do. Or, I mean, sometimes in conversations, you can really understand what somebody knows. We made those distinctions today about doing skills and knowing skills. And knowing can turn into teaching, or sometimes, it can turn into doing. If somebody knows a lot about a topic, are there tasks related to that? Could they create a PowerPoint or write an article, right? There's lots of things that are connected to knowledge that we have to kind of help people figure out how to share and contribute. So just think about that. Finally, I just want to share a story about Kea. She's a young woman that I worked with early on in a school to work project who no one had a vision for employment for, including her family. When Kea's family would go on vacation and she didn't want to go, she would help herself to the senior living center down the street and go and kind of volunteer and hang out there and then kind of go home and go to bed. It was just this thing. And so because part of the process is where do people spend time? Where are they choosing to spend time in their community? The employment specialist went, interviewed all of these seniors that she spent time with, talked to the staff, and what we learned is that there was a real opportunity there for her to contribute and do things. So we created a position for her to help with tasks at the assisted living. She painted nails, she helped with meals, she did it after school. And then she worked more hours in the summer, and she absolutely loved it. I mean, it just was a perfect job for her during school. This particular assisted living place also had another location because they really didn't have enough hours for her at the one really close to her house. So then we got her set up with paratransit because she lived in a rural town in Cache Valley near the university. And so once she got that paratransit set up, then she was able to go to some alternate days to another location and increase her hours once she was done with school. So this was somebody who didn't have any services. She was on the waiting list and she needed personal assistance herself, but she was supporting other people. And then we just kind of figured out if she needed, when she needed help to go to the restroom or, whatever it was, we just kind of figured that out. We also had some personal assistance services that were available through her Medicaid state plan. So we just kind of pieced all those things together. Again, this was 5 years ago, I think. She did this job for about 3 years and then had some health-related issues. And so we're now kind of revisiting what work's going to look like for her with her new kind of health pieces that we need to consider. But she was really, really proud of this work. And again, nobody had an idea. Her dad told me over and over and over, I just don't see it. I don't see how she can work. She needs help with everything at home, like all of the things. But she knew she could. When we had this picture of her, this was during a discovery activity and she was making this bed, he couldn't believe it. He could not believe that she could make somebody else's bed because she didn't do it. They didn't have her do it at her house. So she probably is making her own bed. She started making her own bed. These are some of the tools that are on the Padlet, and pretty important tools that you will need to do this work. So they are there in the Padlet. I should have linked all of those and I didn't. So I will try and go back and do that before I'll reshare it with Patrick so that these are links to what's on the Padlet. Again, quick summary. We want discovery to answer, who is this person? What is the ideal job for them? And there's not just one job for each person, right? There's many jobs that fit somebody. That's what I had to learn, right? That discovery doesn't just get you the golden ticket to one job for the rest of your life. Okay, I have way too many slides. And that's where I'm going to end it because it is just way too late. We have to be done. Any questions, thoughts? I know it's a lot. Intro to discovery is just way too thick to do in an hour. So thank you.